Hello and welcome to another special video, everybody, featuring Farvifian Guard. Woo! Yay!
Hey,
Hurrah!
wow.
Today, Farv, we're gonna talk about a little bit of something special: apathy and burnout. But first off, we want to talk a little bit on the great article that they gave us yesterday or today, depending, of how to build a world eaters army. I can give you the shortcut version. It is
Ooh.
get 8 bound, buy 8 bound. Did you know about 8 bound? 8 bound, by the way. Okay, now that we've covered that, let's get to the topic.
Wow.
Sorry.
Well,
I didn't want to sound too bitter, but when I see an article like that, I'm like, please don't put an army builder up for the faction that needs more units. Assholes. Oh,
well,
by the way, Year of Chaos.
Oh boy.
So, so far, we've all been there. We've all dealt with it before, and it's burnout and apathy. You know when you just kind of start finding that passion for things kind
Well,
of go
can we
out on
start
you.
can we start with just a brief illustration of the difference between burnout and apathy? Because there's a pretty stark difference between them.
Okay. Do you want to do apathy or burnout?
Well, I have experience with burnout. I've experienced burnout with some types of video games. I've experienced burnout with my own fucking, novel writing. Burnout is when it's not necessarily a thing that you dislike or that you don't want to do. It's when you've either been so overexposed to it or you've done it so much for such long periods of time that you just kind of find yourself at a point where you're like, I just don't want to do this anymore. And oftentimes it's not even a permanent issue, it's just you needing to take time and step away, and some of us are more stubborn about that than others, which can actually just make it worse. But it's when you need to stop something, you need to give yourself a break and step away and come back to it, with a fresh perspective, or at least a little bit of time to decompress. Burnout
Yeah.
can be recovered from. Apathy is a little bit more difficult.
Though it can lead into apathy in some cases,
Yes.
depending on how things go with it. Apathy generally is, for example, when all of the passion you had for something just kind of fades away. It can be because folks that you used to do things with are no longer there. It can just be that the thing that you had passion for got removed, and you just don't feel that drive anymore. And in both cases, they can kind of lead into one another, and it can be a bit of a awful situation to run into. And I've seen it firsthand. I've experienced it to a degree. Now, the way I dealt with burnout was I mostly paced myself, so I was slow fast. And by that, I meant I generally would go, well, I want to get this unit, just using Warhammer, for example,
Okay.
done by X time. So I would go, okay, well, I'm going to assemble a guy from a box once a night. I'm going to, when they're all built, I'm going to then, uh, and part of the whole thing is I would then go and prime one or two each night after
Mm-hmm.
that, and then I would do like base coating in a similar style. I would effectively kind of plan it out over a long period of time and give myself just about enough that I knew I wouldn't be overwhelmed because I had enough experience trying to rush projects. I'd be like, well, I can casually sit down, get one guy uh, a little bit of prep or at least one step, and each night I do that gets me a step closer. But I would see it when folks would be like, I'm going to buy this whole thing and I'm going to put it all together and I'm going to do all the priming and all the painting and all of this, and they would just get to a point where a lot of times they wouldn't even get like a quarter way through. they would just get to a point where they're like, I can't even stand to look at this project anymore. And in my experience, a lot of times when people would do that, it put them in a larger amount of risk to just kind of be like constantly putting it off, putting it off, putting it off. And then what would happen is eventually kind of turn into an apathy where they'd be like, well, why was I even doing that? And then eventually they just never get the project done and they'd never come back to the hobby. They just move on to something else. I don't know if you've seen anything like that before.
I have I've seen it with a couple of things that we used to be involved with, like Resident Evil, Star Wars. I've seen that happen quite a bit with Star Wars.
Oh yeah, Star Wars is not faring very well.
And honestly, Resident Evil is just kind of taking a slower road. There was all that hype that built up with, I want to say, a lot of the wrong fans with 7, and then 8 came along and was kind of split because some people liked, some of the new direction and some of the new weapons and things they did, and I thought some of it was interesting, but it wasn't Resident Evil. And ultimately, even that kind of damaged it. And then they just kept, focusing on remakes, 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 and the more of the remakes they did, the less they felt like actual remakes of the games they were supposed to be. And now you look like 4 was super hyped and nobody's talking about it anymore.
Well, it's
And
the
in
same
fact,
with
less and less people are talking about Resident Evil.
remakes of 2 and 3, and
Mm-hmm.
at this point, I don't know. It's one of those situations where it can be a real pain to deal with, especially when you financially invested in something. And I've seen people buy like box sets, for example, and they're like, I'm going to do this thing, and then they just destroy their ability to get the project done in any feasible time. And,
And I
really,
feel like part of that is almost a burnout born of inexperience. Like they come at it with kind of unreasonable expectations of how things works and of themselves, and they push themselves so hard they just get bored and frustrated because of how slow progress can be, especially if you're new to it, and they just kind of drive themselves out of it.
I've even seen it with older, more experienced hobbyists and people in entertainment. And oftentimes it was really kind of born out of the person knew what they were getting into and what they were doing, but things would change or something would be eliminated that they really real were passionate about with it. And they would just kind of be like, well, there's nothing there for me anymore. So I'm just going to move on. And I've seen that before. And oh boy, that can be a real killer in a lot of ways. And what I thought would be good is while we meander a little bit, is just to say how, some good ways of dealing with these things. The first suggestion I'm going to make, and let me know if this is a bridge too far, just in case it's just too
Okay.
kooky for you. Um, if you see something that you're really, really hyped for in the moment in
Mm-hmm.
the marketing, don't buy it for a month.
Okay.
Just don't.
Explain that a little bit.
Okay. Now, this is much less applicable in video games, but it can be effective in video
Actually, it
games.
can be very applicable to video games because I've done it in that case. But even
So,
from a hobby standpoint, let's have an example.
a good example is, let's say they bring out some army. You're looking at all the stuff. It's being hyped. Everybody's like, "Oh my god, this is going to be great," and you've never had interest in it before, and you're really super hyped for it. And my suggestion would be really simply, wait a month, wait 2 months, then come back to it and see if you still have that interest. Because what I found is a lot of people, they get caught up in the marketing, they get caught up in the excitement, and they're like, wow, this is going to be really great. And then They make that purchase, they sit down with that thing, and they're like, what in the hell am I doing with this? And
Like a go ahead.
I think that's a good first step in a healthy habit to have, because this is going to prevent you from burning out, especially if a lot of hobbies is diving into something involving that hobby that you might not actually have an interest in. So that's my first step in how to deal with some of this. My other step is this: have a reasonable time frame. Learn what is the most you can handle before something becomes tedious. And what I mean by that is, let's say you're getting into Warhammer, bolt action, whatever. You get that squad, you know what you're going to be building, and you go, before I get sick of doing this thing, so let's say building models, like assembling them, I could put up with one, two, or three. Well, before you reach that point where it just gets too tedious for you to put up with, what you do is go, okay, well, I can do one a night. So I'll assemble one every night. I'll put a time at the evening or whatever when I have to sit down, make that guy, and that's one more guy, and I'll do that until the whole group is done. And then repeat that with priming them. Well, even though a lot of time, if you're hand priming them, do it that way. If you're priming them in bulk, when you get to the painting phase, block in a single color on each one of them in the same way you did the assembly. And what you'll find out is that you'll get these things done. It'll take you a little longer, but you're not going to run into as much burnout in my experience.
That seems reasonable enough.
What's a tip you think you could offer, Favre?
Well, in terms of that hobby, I've got a little less experience because I'm okay at putting the stuff together, but I can't paint to save my
Well,
fucking
you know,
life.
what's
But
a hobby or a tip you'd say for that can be generally applicable to anything?
well, with anything, like let's say video games for one thing, like just a good way not to get burned out on a video game, obviously, is to take a break, especially if you're dealing with something that's just really frustrating, be it a boss or a puzzle or something. Step away, play another game is another good thing. So if you have a
Take a
hobby,
walk.
for example, I mean, take a walk can work. Is not necessarily needed. You don't have to do necessarily something even completely different. Just just step away, take a break, or if you still feel like doing the hobby, like sometimes with my writing, when I couldn't write something specific, I would try to just write some other weird thing on the side, or take a break and read or something. Look for some inspiration that way. It's a thing. And in terms of the hobby, if you're just burnt out with painting or something, maybe you could try to put together some other models, or maybe you could look through the rules or see if you could find some novelization or something connected with Warhammer in particular. Maybe just dig up one of the old books or read through an old codex or something.
Oh,
You
it's a
know,
good point. How did you deal with preventing burnout when you were writing? Because you've written a book and you have another book in the works right now.
yeah, it's just final edits. Well, honestly, I had to force myself to kind of set a schedule. One of
Did
my
you
biggest problems early on is I was trying to do too much at a time.
did you put any limits on like how much you would do at a
I
time?
basically set up initially that I would do only up to 1 to 3 pages per day.
Okay.
And that usually helped because I felt like I was still accomplishing something, but I wasn't spending an entire day sitting at my computer staring at it, desperately trying to come up with more to do.
Well, that sounds completely fair. Well, I think the last thing we can really cover here is apathy. Now,
Yeah.
I'm going to come at this in a bit of a different way. I think, to a degree, that the feeling of loss of interest can be actually a healthy thing, in so much as it might be a good signal when you start finding you're not as interested in something to take a step back and see if it's something that really is something you still care about and want to invest in, as opposed to over investing, which might actually create more of that situation so that you are never able to really bring yourself back into something. I think it's a healthy response within reason to have that, well, am I really still interested in this? And I say that because I've seen people overextend themselves with just about any kind of thing. Collecting cards, collecting comics, uh, classic cars, about anything, home repairs, where they get to a point where they've pushed themselves to where they just don't care anymore. And I think it's a healthy thing when you're sitting there and you're like, I just don't want to do this anymore, to take a step back. I think it's like a signal in a way for people to step back and go, I need to reassess. I need to consider this. Maybe I need to take a break from it. I think it's a good thing when you realize what's going on as a signal to kind of give yourself
And
a
honestly,
little bit of retrospective.
there's an aside I have on that because, and if you don't like it and you're listening, well, just take a step back if you can and be a little bit more objective. Is Games Workshop honestly capitalizes and almost preys on this level of freaking, be it dedication or stubbornness? So why they put out release after release after release of stuff, trying to bait people in, not just for the sales, because they know once they've got somebody hooked and they just keep doing it, they'll keep buying it.
Oh,
You
they're
know.
100% guilty of being very predatory with the hype train, and
Mm-hmm.
that's why I said it's a healthy thing when people feel a little bit of apathy set in, because what usually will happen is if you keep someone in, for example, if you're in a survival situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, you're at that high like level of oh my god about everything. Well, you
Yeah.
burn out and then you become inattentive. And in terms of like Warhammer, for
Yep.
example, I've seen people be super high on the hype, and then when they finally burn out, they're just done. And
And sometimes you get people who they experience burnout because it's actually fucking up their life.
oh yeah,
Because they get so obsessed and they become either financially unstable, or it starts to take a hit on their family or their social life. You got to know when to step back, because sometimes that burnout will hit in ways you don't necessarily expect, and it's ways that actually cause actual damage.
and the thing is you don't want that apathy to spread, which it can very easily spread outside of the
Mm-hmm.
hobby. You could just start going, well, why do I care about any of this? Now, if you're at that point, please seek out a professional. But I think there's some good signs in there, and hopefully some of this at least be helpful for people. And I hope they at least enjoy hearing two grogs talk about some of their experience. Of course, if you're interested in anything Farvifian said, you can check out his channel. I'll make sure I put the link to it in the description. He's an author and he does a lot of gameplay videos and listens to me complain a lot. Um, and I'd like to thank everybody for watching the videos, and of course, for all the well wishes over the things that were going on with Jerry. He's very much missed, and
Yeah.
my mother is struggling a little bit. He was her buddy, and unfortunately, we weren't able to get everything taken care of. So thanks everybody for joining us, and have a lovely day.
See you later.